Hello and welcome to Free Hit, an FPL podcast. I'm your host, Jace. That's right, Chris is on vacation this week, so I'm going solo this time. When he mentioned a special guest last week, he was talking about me. I'll be talking to myself this episode to answer all of your burning questions about the wild Game Week 30 we just had, and go over my plans for my wildcard in Game Week 31, which I activated as soon as I could. Game Week 31 starts on Tuesday. You heard that right. A classic midweek game week for 31, which is why we'll have an abbreviated episode this week. I'll be going over the game week, Chris and I's teams, some match recaps, and my wildcard plan going into 31. Don't forget, the deadline for this game week is Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, so don't forget to lock those teams in. What a crazy start to game week 30 we had, with the early kickoff being one of the craziest early kickoffs I've seen in quite a long time. For Newcastle to go from 1-0 up to 1-3 down to 4-3 up was insane and set the level for all the goals we were to see in the afternoon kickoff for game week 30. The only clean sheets we saw were Aston Villa against Wolves and both Man City and Arsenal, which was a 0-0 stinker. I mean, what a snooze that was. And on top of all that, we had injuries galore. Newcastle United simply cannot catch a break, with Jamal Lascelles going down early with a torn ACL. For West Ham, Areola also had to leave the pitch due to injury in the first half. Anthony Gordon got a silly second yellow and saw red, which means he's suspended until after the next two game weeks. Watkins came off early after 45 minutes due to a hamstring injury, and Ake also went down for Man City and was subbed in the first half, with the latter two picks probably not being in a ton of wildcard 30 or 31 teams, but there were definitely some problems for those of you who wildcarded in 30 who might have to do some extra surgery on your team that you didn't think you'd have to do this early on after your wildcard. That wasn't obviously all of the injuries we saw, but those were the highlights. Just make sure you mind those yellow flags, people. Pay attention to the game, pay attention to Twitter, see who's fit, see who's not. Like I said, early kickoff with a midweek game week this week, so you want to stay on top of all of those details. And with that, we'll move on to Chris and I's teams for game week 30. As for my team, I did okay. Small red arrow, but I ended up on 55 points after the -4 goes into effect, so 59 without that being considered, which was okay, slightly above average, but still, like I said, small red arrow. I started Kelleher in goal, which turned out to be the better option of Leno, since Kelleher got 2 points as opposed to 1, and was only 1 save away from getting that extra save point. I had a back line of Virgil, Udogie, and Robinson, Udogie being the only one of those to score more than 1 point with 2, so great defensive picks by me, leaving Gabriel on the bench with a 6-pointer. I had a midfield of Madison, Palmer, KDB, Salah, and Son. Some great returns there from Palmer, Salah, and Sonny, who was my captain and got me those 20 points. And I had a forward line of Watkins and Tony. For my transfers this week, I sent Doughty out and brought Gusto in early, as you probably heard on the pod from last week. And at the last minute, I transferred Garnacho out and brought Salah in because I was scared of Salah against Brighton, given their history and their form this season, and obviously for good reason, as we all saw what could have happened. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have done the Gusto trade, but I wanted to get ahead of those price rises because I knew how important my budget would be. I ended up not starting him because I lost faith in the Chelsea back line. That Burnley fixture just looked like a nightmare to me, and it turns out that piece was right, but it was still kind of a waste of 4 points there. But, that's FPL. As for Chris, he scored 53 points after a -8. Yeah, he made 3 transfers this week. Captain Salah, he has no chips active and no wild card at all. So Chris started Petrovic in goal with a 2-pointer. He had a back line of Pedro Porro, Gusto, and Brantwaith. Again, Pedro Porro, the only one of those defenders that got him more than 1 point with 2 points. Chris also had Palmer. He had Alanga, Captain Salah, Saka, and Sonny. He had a front line of Tony and Solanke, who both returned for him. Decent outing for Chris. For his transfers, he sent Dubravka out for Petrovic, Doughty out for Gusto, and he transferred Madison for Salah, for whom he captained as we just mentioned. Chris ended up on the -8 because he realized Dubravka was going to block him from the triple Newcastle potential Gordon bench boost in game week 37, and it was going to take a hit to get him out. Opted to do that early to get Chelsea's good fixtures, but as we'll talk about later, that may have been an error. Right, on to the game week match recaps. We'll start off with Newcastle 4, West Ham 3. The highlight here was Garnacho passing on the double drawn penalty assists torch to Gordon, who ended up with 3 assists total, but also with a red card. Isak with 2 goals, both being penalties. Do we think Gordon is a lock if you're wildcarding in 31, even though he's on a 2-game suspension? For me, I'm a little bit on the fence here. I definitely see his value, and it's not like you have to start him for the next 2 weeks. There's definitely good enough midfielders where you could bench him for 2 weeks, but then again, you could also bring him in on a free transfer in 2 weeks when he's off of his ban. So definitely up to the manager at that point. I probably won't bring him in just yet, but I do think he is probably the only must-have Newcastle asset after this week. Isak probably also should be considered potentially over Nunez, depending on how you're going to play your forward line. Just based on Nunez's performance against Brighton, we saw classic Nunez who loved being offside, didn't love getting the finishing touch on the shot, no goals, no returns. The only hesitation here is Nunez does play against Sheffield next week, so definitely something to consider. But Isak definitely one you want to keep in mind if you're scared of Nunez but want to keep that forward spot available for someone in a similar price bracket, especially since Isak is on penalties. So just something to consider there as you're planning for your 31 wildcard or your transfer strategy moving forward. As for the West Ham assets, just keep in mind that Ariel did go off injured, so that could mean a couple different things, but you just want to pay attention to those pressers leading up to Tuesday, see if he's healthy, how long-term the injury is, because Fabianski could be a good shout as a differential there. If people went Areola in their wildcard 30, they're probably not going to have the luxury of making a goalkeeper transfer, so it could be a good way to differentiate yourself in the keeper position at a similar or cheaper price point. As far as their attacking assets are concerned, I know Bowen returned twice, but he has this habit of returning a lot in one match and then not returning for the next 6 or 7 game weeks. So for me, I'm probably not considering a West Ham attacking asset for my wildcard team. But, to each their own. If you have the tolerance for that type of risk, good on you. But I think I'm staying away from the likes of Bowen, Antonio, and Kudos. He had the double return also, just like Bowen, and ended up with only 2 bonus points. So just something to consider. But I would probably stay away from your West Ham assets as is right now if you're on a wild card for 31. And that brings us to Liverpool 2, Brighton 1. Salah could have really punished non-owners this week, but the FPL gods had other plans. I'm still confused how his header on the first goal wasn't an assist. I saw a lot on Twitter where they were saying there was a hint of offsides, but to me, if Salah would have shot that, it deflected, and then Diaz would have put that in the back of the net, he still would have got an assist, and that header looked a lot more intentional than a deflected shot. So I really don't understand how he doesn't get credit for the assist there, but as someone who didn't captain him and just owns him, I'm kind of glad he didn't get credit for that assist because that could have really affected my rank. Salah did have 12 shots on target, which is the most this season, and he only got the 1 goal. So again, I was basically behind my couch towards the end of that match because he could have hauled. I think he's got to be a lock in your wildcard Game Week 31 team. If you don't have him, get him in. Even if you're not on a wildcard, take the -4 because Salah is going to be key for Liverpool in this run-in, especially since they're first in the league now, and they're going to want to keep it that way. Nunez was pretty absent, as usual. Still potentially worth a shout against Sheffield United, who they have this upcoming game week. Might be worth the punt on Nunez, and then if he doesn't perform, send him on his way and bring Isak in, as we just discussed. But as far as Brighton assets go, I think you stay away completely from all of them. I don't know that there's any worth considering beyond Gross. And as we've mentioned before on this podcast, he's at a weird price point. And depending on who you are, you probably can't even afford him anyways. So stay away from the Brighton assets. Consider Salah. Consider Nunez. If you want to punt in the midfield, you can take a look at McAllister. He played excellent, was picking out some great passes. And yeah, potentially a good way to differentiate yourself. Moving on to Tottenham 2, Luton Town 1. Spurs just cannot seem to get going in the first half lately, and Maddison himself seems to be a shadow of his former self as far as returns go. He was still playing some great balls, involved in the attack, but just cannot seem to get the returns that we were all hoping for. So I'm glad to see him leave my team during this week's wildcard. Sonny, who I captained along with a lot of other people in the FPL community based on how Twitter was going at this time, came good with the reward for his captainers and a goal in added time and all 3 bonus points, giving him 20 and becoming the second best captain option for this week next to Palmer. The big note here was Brennan Johnson coming on and really changing the game. I imagine he'll be a lock in the coming weeks. Probably not worth a spot in your team until after double game week 34 when we learn more about when Spurs are making up some of their missed fixtures, but definitely worth considering given how dynamic he was down the wing, causing the own goal, got the assist for Sonny. So 2 assists for Johnson, someone to consider if you want to differentiate yourself down the line. As for the Luton assets, I still think you stay away from these guys. They're leaking goals, and the people who are supposed to be scoring those goals aren't talking to you, Morris. Chong did have the goal. Doughty had a great goal line clearance, but again, not assets I'm going to consider for my wildcard team. Maybe down the stretch if you need some cheap enablers, but other than that, I say you stay away from all the Luton Town assets as it is right now. Some other assets you should stay away from are anyone who plays for Sheffield. However, I'm almost confident this was a scoreline no one saw coming, with Sheffield United 3, Fulham 3. Definitely not something anyone would have predicted, but I think probably regression for both teams, as Fulham was probably overperforming and Sheffield obviously has been underperforming. That goal by Muniz, what a strike. How acrobatic can you be? He returns again, and I am still kicking myself for not owning him, even though I've been talking about him for seemingly the last 8 weeks. I should have brought him in for Morris instead of Gusto for Doughty. Might have prevented that red arrow, but hindsight's 2020. I still think Muniz, Robinson, and Leno are probably the only Fulham assets to consider, with all but Leno being really good enablers. I myself have owned Leno pretty much all season. I think he's a really reliable goalkeeper, and I think he's number 2 right now for total points next to Onana. Maybe he's 3, but still a really good option. He's one I'm struggling with because I want to find a way to fit him in my team, but I just can't decide if there are 2 better goalkeeping options from those who have better fixtures and potential doubles coming up. So that's where I'm at with the Fulham assets. I probably will have either Leno or Robinson in my team, and Muniz right now is filling my 3rd striker role on my wild card. So I still think those are your only 3 assets. And again, stay as far away from those Sheffield United assets as you can. Even though they scored 3 goals against Fulham, I doubt this is a form they're going to be able to maintain down the stretch. And to close out our stretch on relegation zone teams, we have Chelsea 2, Burnley 2. Unlike the previous fixture, wow, the scoreline was unexpected. Nobody's really surprised given Chelsea's form this season. However, Cole Cold Palmer is at it again with an absolute haul, 2 goals and all 3 bonus points. One of those goals being a cool as you like it Panenka from the spot. He also should have had a handful of assists as well. He's single-handedly keeping this season from going from bad to worse for Chelsea. The man needs help. I know those defensive assets are looking appealing, but maybe the performance this week gives us a chance to second-guess loading up on those Chelsea assets, especially double defense like Gusto and Petrovic in goal. Petrovic's blunder for the second goal potentially sees him being replaced by Sanchez, the backup keeper for now. So might want to consider, if you've got Petrovic in goal, giving it a break, maybe putting someone else in who you know is going to start and are a bit more confident in their back line to keep those clean sheets or at least get save points. So again, given the way this result went, no matter how good Chelsea's fixtures are coming up, and they're good, but we saw even earlier this season how no matter how good those fixtures are, it's a bit of a struggle to get returns from Chelsea, and especially the attacking assets like Nick Jackson and Sterling, who both had chances to put Chelsea over the top and secure them 3 points this match. So again, just something to consider when you're looking at bringing in defenders and goalkeepers, especially from Chelsea. Don't get carried away with the potential upcoming fixtures, right? We want good players with good fixtures, right? Not mediocre players and mediocre teams with good fixtures, because it doesn't really do you any good on a double game week if your defenders only get 1 point each game week. So again, have to think about that if you're on your wild card. Don't get carried away with the Chelsea assets. That being said, Cole Panenka Palmer has to be in your team. He's an enabler. He's cheap. And I think he's the best cheap FPL asset we've ever had. Someone might have to fact check me there. But yeah, Palmer's got to be in that wild card team. If you want to be competitive down the line here, you got to have him. Speaking of underperforming teams, let's move on to Brentford 1, Manchester United 1. How Brentford didn't blow them away here, I'll just never know. Tony should have had a haul, but he managed only 1 assist. Man United doing what they do best with a jammy goal against the run of play in added time to plaster over a pedestrian at best performance. But then they still managed to give away a goal minutes later. I think you stay away from your United assets right now. I don't think they're back on the menu. I take everything back that I said about Bruno a couple weeks ago. I think you just got to ignore him. Maybe wait and see if form changes. But to me, this is classic Man United this season. I mean, I just can't understand how they're performing this badly and how Ten Hag still has a job. But I guess that's a conversation for a different podcast. To me, Tony is probably worth a shout against Brighton if you got room in your front line, given what we just watched and then their Liverpool fixture. I won't be going there, but you definitely could. As a Tony owner, I was glad to see him get that assist, but to me, I just don't have the confidence that he's going to haul, but he could against Brighton. You never know. So if you're in between Isak, Nunez, Tony, I think any 3 of those fits that kind of second striker position, and he probably definitely at least needs to be in the conversation in your thought process. Personally, like I said, I'm going to stay away, but you could definitely go there. Again, I'm staying away from the Man United assets. The only one I'm willing to consider right now is Onana. Again, top point scoring, keeper in the game. And yeah, he's probably the only United asset that I'm considering, with his price point being the only thing keeping me away. So I'm still kind of stuck in what goalkeeper I'm going to start, as I mentioned earlier, with Leno and the Petrovic comments. So Onana is still there, but I think you stay away from all other United assets unless you need a really cheap enabler like Garnacho. He'll fit really nicely into your team, into that 5th midfielder slot. You can bench him if he has to come off the bench. He'll probably at least get you 2 points, and he's good for an assist or a goal every now and then. But even he didn't look very inspired in this United-Brentford matchup. So again, probably stay away from the United assets as you're picking out those wild card spots. And that brings us to the other Manchester team, the one that's actually performing well this season, albeit they couldn't get it done in this one with Man City 0, Arsenal 0. What a snooze. Arsenal were content to sit back in a mid-block and not really send it. I was still on KDB and hoping he'd get me at least 1 return before I wild card him out, but no such luck. So the KDB experiment, officially a failure, and I'm not sad to see him go. The real winners here were the Arsenal defenders. I saw a lot of folks on Twitter getting flack for starting their Arsenal defenders, and look who's laughing now. Not me. I left Gabriel on the bench with 6 points, which again probably would have prevented me from getting a red arrow. But I digress. I still think you need at least 2 Arsenal players in your Wildcard 31 team, or in your team in general, right? It's probably Saka plus a defender. Even though Saka didn't really do much this game, I saw him fall several times, which brought me personal joy as a Spurs supporter. But nonetheless, one of the best picks in the game. He did come off towards the tail end of the game, whether that was an injury or he was tired or planned. I don't have that information yet, so just keep an eye out on the flag there. We want to watch and see what Arteta says, if he's healthy, if he's not. But yeah, so we want Saka. Just keep an eye out. If you don't have Saka, you probably want another Arsenal midfielder, whether that being Odegaard or Havertz. Coin toss on which one I'd prefer right now. I myself am between Gabriel and Ben White for my defender, price being the major factor. If I go Gabriel as opposed to Ben White, it gives me an extra 0.4 of budget to work with, which means I can upgrade my goalkeeper or another defender and get maybe a better asset than I would if I had Ben White. Although I do like Ben White's ability to go forward and his playmaking ability, so that's a bit where I'm torn. You probably do need a third Arsenal asset, but you can probably free transfer them in before double game week 34 after getting some additional info in the coming game weeks. I'm not sold on who the third is right now. If you had a gun to my head, I'd say it's probably Havertz, just based on recent form. But again, that could change in the coming game weeks depending on who's injured, Martinelli, who's playing, all that fun stuff. So just something to keep your eyes on if you're planning to have that third Arsenal asset. Again, as I mentioned, pay attention to those flags. See who's healthy, see who's playing. Just make sure you've got that info. Like I said, I wouldn't bring in a third Arsenal asset on the wild card right now. I think there are probably better assets for the coming game weeks. Just plan a free transfer to bring that third one in before double game week 34. Moving on to the least exciting block of fixtures, we'll start with Bournemouth 2, Everton 1. Not much here beyond Everton's continued collapse. Will they get relegated? Will they stay up? Seems like that is the constant question here the last couple seasons for Everton. It was good to see Tyler Adams back out there and getting the Man of the Match award. Go, go, USA. Solanke with a great header and on the score sheet again. Good shout as a third striker, depending on what you've got the budget for. I mentioned last week that I didn't see what I wanted to see from Solanke as a forward option, but this week he changed my mind, so I'm definitely considering him. It'll all come down to budget for me. As far as the assets go, beyond Solanke, Semenyo, good shout. He was pretty absent this match, but he's been dynamic this season, so someone to consider. From the Everton side, I think you've only got Brantwaite and Pickford, who are worth considering. But again, same word of caution here as with the Chelsea defensive assets. Even if they've got good fixtures, even if they got double game weeks, if they're going to give up 2 to 3 goals a match, it doesn't really do you any good to fill your team with 1-pointers, regardless of how good the fixtures are or how much you want them to not suck. Moving on to Nottingham Forest 1, Crystal Palace 1. Nottingham Forest really had nothing going until the 60th minute. Some might say that's because Gio Reyna came on the pitch. Some might say otherwise. I'll let you guys be the judge. It was a great assist by Gibbs White, who ended up with 2 bonus points and set assist. I think he's still in my wildcard team as a 5th midfielder and enabler. Wood had a good goal. Depends on what you want to do here. If you need a budget striker and you got a high risk for Wood, he could be worth considering in that third striker slot. I won't go there, but you definitely could. From the Palace side, you had Eze with the great assist. I think he's a really good shout in that midfield. As far as Crystal Palace goes, I think he, Munoz, and now Henderson are probably the only assets that I'm considering personally. I think Munoz is a great pick. He was really unlucky to come off the post there with that cracker strike that he had. I'm definitely considering him in my side, along with Henderson, as a cheap starting keeper option with Johnstone confirmed out for the remainder of the season. And this is where, with my wild card, I'm probably the most stuck, is which of these Crystal Palace defensive assets that I want, whether it's Munoz, whether it's Richards for budget reasons, or again, whether it's Henderson. I probably don't want 2 Crystal Palace defensive assets. So if I have Henderson, I probably won't go Munoz, but if I have Munoz, I probably won't go Henderson. So that's just where I'm at with my wild card currently. I probably will bring Eze in, whether that's on a free transfer or on a free hit, should I choose to use that in double game week 34. So that's where I'm at with the Nottingham Forest and Crystal Palace assets. Moving on to our final match of the weekend, we have Aston Villa 2, Wolves 0. I still think you stay away from loading up heavy on Wolves assets, especially with Cunha still out. But keep an eye on that. You probably just need one for now. Ain't Nori being the only one that I'm considering. I'm really not sure how he missed point blank there when he was one-on-one with the keeper, but man, he should have gotten one. He's a cheap defender and he likes to get forward, and as we've seen, finds himself in front of goal. So he's in my team right now. I think Wolves have great fixtures coming up, and they're likely to keep at least one clean sheet in the coming 3. So like I said, he's in my team now and probably the only one I'm considering until we get Cunha news on his health. If he becomes healthy, I'll probably plan a free transfer to bring him in that third striker spot for me, unless I use my free hit, in which case he will be in my team so long as he's healthy and he's playing. As far as the Aston Villa assets are concerned, the big news here was Diaby hauling. 3-way tie for bonus points here for the 3 bonus points, which I haven't seen in a while, with Konza, Martinez, and Diaby all getting 3. That's pretty impressive. So if you had one or any of those, you're happy. Imagine having 2 of those and getting 3 bonus points each. That'd be pretty sweet. The other news here is Watkins, again, went off at halftime due to a hamstring injury. So as someone who played Watkins this week, that really hurt. That injury sucks. He's probably not in a ton of wildcard teams anyways. You probably didn't wildcard him in 30. You probably didn't hold on to him. And you're definitely not wildcarding him right now in 31. So just some information, nothing groundbreaking there. If you want expensive second striker down the line, when Watkins is back, he's always a good shout, but I definitely think there are better options. Like we've mentioned, Nunez, Isak, or even Tony. I would go to one of those before I went to Watkins anyways. So that wraps it up for Aston Villa Wolves and our match recaps. So now we will move on to transfers and captaincy.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking.
As I mentioned, my wild card is active. I activated it as soon as I woke up Saturday morning, and that was mainly due to grab the assets that I wanted that could potentially price rise overnight. I wanted to lock in those lower prices so it would give me more flexibility as I move around and navigate this wild card before game week 31. What I'm mostly on the fence about is Kelleher keeping his spot with Alisson set to return in 3 weeks, just in time for him to not participate in the double game week. I want some sort of Liverpool defensive representation in my team, given they've given up the second fewest goals this season. I'm on the fence between Robinson from Fulham, or do I bring in Connor Bradley and hope that he plays over Trent Alexander-Arnold at least the majority of the minutes for the upcoming game week. And similarly, I'm between Kelleher and bringing in either Neto or Leno. As I mentioned earlier, I like Neto's upcoming fixtures. I think he's got good save potential, and Bournemouth aren't the worst team in the world. Granted, no one is keeping a ton of clean sheets lately, so that's not really my concern. And Neto's got good save potential, just like Leno and Kelleher. So I'm just a bit on the fence here. The defense and the goalkeeper spots are really the only part that I'm still trying to figure out in my wildcard team, which right now is consisting of Kelleher in goal still, along with Henderson. Again, Kelleher, I'm just not sure if I want to plan a free transfer for him later whenever Alisson comes back. And again, Henderson, I think, is a cheap option in a double soon, and he'll probably have some good save potential. I've got a back line of Nori, Ben White, Anthony Robinson, Udogie, and Gusto right now. Midfield of Gibbs White, Palmer, Saka, Son, Salah, and a front line of Darwin, Holland, and Muniz. Again, I think I'm going to give Darwin a chance against Sheffield, and if he doesn't perform, I'll transfer him out and bring Isak from Newcastle in. The only other things that I'm considering, again, as we mentioned, is Gordon will probably come into my team after his suspension is served. I've got a little bit of money in the bank, so I can probably send Gibbs White out and bring Gordon in. Same with Kelleher and Robinson. Potentially, I'm going to bring in Neto or Leno in place of Kelleher and bring in Connor Bradley in place of either Robinson or Gusto. I just can't decide. I wish Chris was here right now because he could probably give me some good pointers like he normally does during this podcast. We'll see how my rank goes and how this turns out after me doing it myself as opposed to getting some advice from my wonderful co-host Chris, who, as I mentioned earlier, is on vacation. Hope he's having a good time while I sit here and toil away over my wild card for game week 31. For those of you who care, Chris did give us his wild card pick, should he have one, if he was wild carding in this game week, just like me. Those of you who tuned in last week, you heard that Chris would line up his wildcard 31 like this: goalkeeper duo of Neto and Pickford, back line of Trent Alexander-Arnold when he's healthy, Brantwaite, Nori, Gabriel, and Richards or Munoz if you've got the budget. He's got Palmer, Salah, Saka, Son, and Eze in the midfield, and a front line of Solanke, Cunha, and Nunez. So this is one, again, where you are potentially bench boosting in double game week 34. So I wonder after these fixtures if this is still the way that Chris would line up a wild card in 31. I guess we will have to wait until next week to see what his thoughts are. As for captains this week, I think the only candidate is Salah. If you have him, captain him, and just leave him captained until he shows us otherwise. He could have punished a lot of non-owners and non-captainers this week, but he didn't. A lot of us got lucky. Lightning doesn't strike twice, right? So Salah is not someone I want to be without, and he's got the best fixture playing against Sheffield, who have been leaking goals left and right this season. I imagine Salah will be a bit more clinical this week than he was against Brighton. Beyond Salah, potentially, if you want to differentiate yourself, you could captain Nunez. I'm not near that brave. So I'm going to stick with Salah. I think you should stick with Salah. He's probably the auto captain for me moving forward until I see otherwise. And that does it for me this week, guys. Thanks for hanging in there with me. If you're still listening for my first solo pod, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to our show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your shows. Follow us on X, Instagram, and Threads at FPL_free-hit-pod. We've been getting a little bit of love on Twitter. I really appreciate that. I know Chris does too. So thanks for that. Keep that up. Retweet us, like our tweets, show us some love. We really appreciate it and love the FPL community. Be sure to join us next week to talk game week 32, review game week 31. Hopefully Chris will be back and rejuvenated from his vacation. Until then, take care.